All right, hi friends. Today we're going to go over a couple of knitting techniques that I frequently use in my sock patterns. If you care about what products I'm using, I will give you all the details at the end so we can just dive in. So first technique we're going to go over is called Judy's Magic Cast On. This is my favorite toe up sock cast on, and I really like it because it's very seamless. I'm going to be using a bigger yarn than what we would typically be using on socks, just so you can kind of see a little bit better for this one. So let's get started. I'm going to tie a slip knot first, and then you put the slip knot on your needles. Again, these are bigger needles than what you will usually be using for socks. So next what we're going to do is hold the two knitting needles together. This is a cable needle, by the way. If you're working with like double point needles or whatever, it's the same. You're just going to first work your cast on and then distribute the stitches over 4 needles, but you'll just cast on over 2. I actually didn't leave this long enough. You're going to want to leave a bit of a tail. If you're doing a small size, then you can leave a short tail, but if you're doing like any of the bigger sizes, you'll need a little more than that. So I leave a tail, I don't know, what is that, like 10 inches maybe? Okay, so we're gonna hold our 2 needles together with the cable hanging out to the right. You should have the yarn tail, whoops, oh my land. You should have the yarn tail coming off the back and then the working yarn coming from the front. So I'm going to, just like we do for a regular long tail cast on, we're gonna put our fingers in between the 2 threads and then open it up and kind of grab the tail. What I like to do, I know that this is not what most people do, but I actually wrap it around my pinky because I am a tension control freak, I guess. But you don't really need to do that. So you should have kind of like what we do normally for a long tail cast on, with the 2 needles. This is not terribly hard once you get the swing of it, but at first you'll need to pay attention to which is the yarn tail and which is the working yarn. So the yarn tail should be the one that's at the back, and the working yarn is the thread that's at the front. So I kind of pull them out and use my pointer finger on my right hand to kind of stop it from sliding away. Next, we're gonna kind of rotate our hand down and bring the yarn around the outside and through the center of the needles. Okay, so that's 1 stitch cast on, around the outside, through the center, just like that. So you'll now have 1 stitch on both needles. This is 2 stitches cast on at this point. So now to cast on another stitch, we're going to kind of rotate around this way. I just like bring it around the back and then bring the yarn around over top of the needle and then through the middle again. And we're just going to continue to do that, around the outside, through the middle, around the outside, through the middle, around the outside, through the middle. So you can see now I have 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So yeah, you'll just continue in that way. I just kind of rotate my hand around the needles like that. You don't have to pull them super tight, but you don't want them super loose either. Just like about like this. You don't need to like torture yourself to get it super tight though. So you just continue to cast on until you had the number of stitches required. Once I have the number of stitches required, I actually tie just a little slip knot this way. Just to hold the last stitch snug, because it starts to get like kind of weird and leggy sometimes, and it like just drives me insane. So I know most people don't do that, but I just work that slip knot, and then we'll work the first round. You just go ahead and knit in the round like you do normally with socks, just like that. Knit to the end of the first needle. Again, if you're working with double point needles, before you get started, just distribute them over the 4 needles, but it gets very, very fiddly. So personally, for this toe-up socks, I really prefer the magic loop for that. And then we'll work the second side. Oh, and I forgot, this is important. When you work the second side, all of the stitches are going to be twisted, as you can see. So instead of working the front like that, we're going to work the back loop and just knit the back loop just only on this first setup round, because on the rounds after this, they will now be be resolved, so you don't need to do anything different. Okay, so that's the first round worked. Now, when I get back to the beginning of the round, I pull out the slip knot, and I just kind of actually stick it on the outside of the work, and I use that kind of as my beginning of the round marker because I'm a little lazy. So I just stick that on the outside there. And if you like, as you work the toe of your sock, you can move it from front to back, alternating as you work each row. That's gonna actually weave in the tail for you. I don't know if it's actually any more or less work, but that's, that's what I do. Another thing that I do after you get kind of good at this cast on, I don't actually use a slip knot at the beginning typically when I'm doing it. I just kind of lay this over here like that. The yarn tail is again going off the top of the back needle, and that way I don't have that awkward little knot in the end of my toe, and just go ahead like that. But again, that's an advanced, don't do that right at the beginning. Okay, that is Judy's Magic Cast On. All right, the second technique we're gonna go over today is German short rows. I know you're probably like, oh, I don't want to learn another short rows. I already know how to do wrap and turn. I did the same exact thing for a lot of years. And once you finally try German short rows, you'll be like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe that I have denied myself how much easier the short rows are. Trust me, these are so much easier. So I will recommend it, but you do what you think is right. So in this sample, I've already worked my gusset increases, as you can see. I've already worked across needle one. I'm just going to show you German short rows over the heel. So the first thing that you're going to do is knit to the center of the heel, however many stitches the pattern tells you. All right, then we're going to place a marker. That just indicates where the center of the heel is. It's not gonna really do that much, but it's easier to count less stitches, so that's why we put that there. For my size, I'm gonna knit 8 more. Okay, so now we're gonna knit the front and the back. Knit 1. The following stitches are German short row. So to work a German short row on the right side here, on a knit side, I guess I should say, we're gonna knit 1 stitch. Now we're gonna turn the work. Okay, so the way that we do the German short row is you're just gonna move the last stitch that you worked. This is the German short row stitch. This would be the equivalent of the wrap and turn stitch. So we're gonna move the stitch over to the right hand needle. Next, we're gonna just kind of wrap the yarn around the right hand needle. Now you'll kind of see it's kind of like got this little twisted thing going on, and it kind of has 2 stitches looking now. This is the German short row stitch, even though it looks like 2. It kind of looks like there's 2 stitches stacked on top of each other. This is the same stitch though, so don't get confused and accidentally make an increase there. We're gonna continue to purl on the row. Don't pull this first stitch right after it's super tight. We don't want this to be super tight. It is not gonna cause you gaps or anything. Just make sure that you don't pull it super tight, otherwise you're gonna have a really hard time working it later. So just leave it not too tight. I mean, don't go crazy with it being too loose either, but that's about how we want it. So then you'll purl until however many it tells you to do. All right, when we get to the other side, we're gonna purl front and back. Purl 1. Okay, the following stitches are German short row stitch. So we're gonna purl it like normal, turn the work. Okay, so this one's a little bit weird. Your yarn normally on a knit side is gonna be at the back. We're gonna bring it to the front of the work. So when it's at the front, you must bring it to the front first. Then slip the last stitch, the short row stitch, over. Now we're gonna kind of do the same thing actually. We just kind of wrap it around, wrap the working yarn around the needle, and you'll see again it makes kind of like a double stitch, it looks like to me. Just kind of a weird one. You'll be able to be like, oh, what is that? Then you know you're at your short row stitch, and then you'll just turn and work the other way. Again, do not pull the first stitch right after it's super tight. So you just continue in this way back and forth. I'll show you just once again a knit German short row, knit 1, flip work around. We're gonna take this stitch, slide it over the right hand needle. Now wrap the yarn around, and that's the German short row stitch. So to do it on the purl side, we're gonna purl one, wrap it, or I mean flip it, and then wrap the yarn around like that. So that's how those look. When we are working German short rows, whenever you get to the following row where you're going to have to, they call it resolving the German short row, when you're going to have to knit into this again for the first time, what you're going to do is knit over to the stitch, okay? When you get to it, you'll see this kind of long leg coming out of the work over here. Basically, you're just going to knit them together. It's very easy. Just knit those two together. That's resolved. That's all you do. Okay, on the purl side, it's the same. We're just gonna, I'm really screwing up these socks, but I'll pull it out later. You'll purl until you get to this where it looks like it's kind of like an X, like stacked on top of each other. You just purl them together, easy peasy. And then if you look on it after we've knitted up, look at how much better the resolution looks than wrap and turn. My wrap and turns always look so tortured, and I feel like this looks so much better. Once we have resolved all of those, you just continue to knit on as directed. It might take you a little bit of time to practice those German short rows at first, but by the time you finish, you know, a pair of socks, you'll have it pretty well down. All right, that's it. At this point in the work, we're going to go over technique number 3, which is JSSBO, or Jenny Surprisingly Stretchy Bind Off. It's commonly just abbreviated. This is really a must-know technique for all toe-up socks because it's the only bind off that I'm aware of that gives you adequate stretch to get the sock like really comfortably over your heel. We want the fabric to remain this level of elastic as it is on the needles. Basically, the way that we do this technique is every stitch we're binding off gets an extra yarn over. That yarn over is just going to give us the stretch that we're going to really need. So if you've worked a regular bind off, it's just basically a little bit of a moderation on that. What we're going to do before we work each stitch is work a yarn over. The first yarn over is going to correspond with the knit stitch in my ribbing. So I have like knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1. So to work a knit stitch in JSSBO, we're going to yarn over, but do it backwards. So instead of doing it the normal way that you're used to, we just go around the other way, and then we're going to knit 1 stitch. We're going to take the yarn over and just draw it over the knitted stitch. So that, we didn't even bind anything off yet. We just got the first stitch ready. The next stitch is a purl, so you are going to use a regular yarn over. Always regular yarn over on purls, reverse yarn over on knits. So we'll do a regular one, then purl a stitch. Now we're gonna take the yarn over and draw it over the last stitch, and then take the first stitch and bring it over as well. As you practice, you'll be able to do both the yarn over and the previous stitch, pull them over at the same time, but at first you can just keep them separated. We're back to a knit stitch, so we do a reverse yarn over, knit, draw the yarn over, and the stitch over. So that's bound off now. So regular yarn over, purl, draw these both over, reverse yarn over, knit, draw them both over. So we're just kind of making a little bit of this like extra cushion on both stitches, and then drawing those yarn overs, or drawing those stitches over. As you do this, I'm just going to move this back over for a second. You can test it. Do you see how like it is full? Like I can't possibly stretch it any further, the fabric, and the binding is keeping up with that. So just check before you get really far into it. Just kind of check your tension on that. Just make sure that everything is looking good, and then you just kind of repeat around until you're done. And that's it on JSSBO. At this point, I have just bound off my stitches. I've worked my little ears. If you're working the same pattern as me, yours should look like this. At this point, I'm going to go over duplicate stitch. Duplicate stitch is something that I use quite a lot when I'm doing socks. This is my pattern barefoot socks, and I did all of the details on this with duplicate stitch. So some people who test for me are like, I hate doing duplicate stitch, I don't want to do that, and that is totally fine. You can work intarsia in the round if you prefer. Personally, I like doing duplicate stitch for this because this is going to act as a natural reinforcer on the ball of my foot. I am somebody who wears through the ball of my foot very, very fast. I do not know why, but for me, it just makes more sense because typically when I make a pair of socks, before I even wear them for the first time, I do preemptive reinforcements. So I just run basically darning stitches along the parts where I know I wear them out. So duplicate stitch for me is just another way to make sure I'm not going to have to darn these socks anytime soon. If you do not wear through this part of your sock and you prefer intarsia in the round, that is perfectly fine. There is nothing wrong with that. Just you decide based on what your preference is. Doing kind of large sections like this can become quite tedious. So I kind of just, you know, finish a section and then take a break. Otherwise, it starts to get really annoying. So for my demonstration, I'm going to do a smaller piece of duplicate stitch. So this is the pattern that I'm going to be doing. I blew it up so that you guys can see it very easily. This is the chart that I'm going to be putting here. It'll look like this when we're done. This is the one I already finished. And you can see it still retains its stretchiness. You really can't super see the stitches beneath, so that's pretty good, I feel like. So to get started, what I do is I find the center of the chart. As you can see, I already did it here. I find the center of the chart. I like working from the center outwards instead of going like side to side. I find that to be the easiest, and I find to kind of localize on one area like this. So I will start by doing just like the nose and the mouth, and then expand my circle, and then maybe I'll come over to here, then over to here. I do not go and do the outline of the whole thing. Like if you're doing a big section like this, sometimes people feel like, oh, is it better for me to just like outline the entire thing? I do not do that. I just pick like, so for this one, I started here. So I started, you know, with this claw, then I can do this claw, then this claw. Then I came down here. I find when I outline a big area, I always make a mistake. I always miscount, inevitably. And then I have to go back and unpick all these stupid damn little stitches. And so I just localize to one area. Once I finished all of this, okay, great. I can do one row of this and then bump down the next row. And I go horizontally on large sections because it looks visually a lot better. I'll show you guys in just a minute. So just make sure, don't bite off too much all at once is going to be my biggest tip on duplicate stitch. Just pick like a section and then move outward from there. I don't know if there's a word for that, but move outwards like that. Okay, so after I've found the center, I need to know how many stitches down I count from my, oh, I forgot to show you also. I also, before I move on from this point, I find the center of where the chart needs to go. So for these, if you're doing the same pattern as me, I kind of stretch them out, and then I find the purl stitch that's just on the other side of the stockinette stitch field. So then I'm going to count inward from purl stitches with both hands. So this is the center stitch. I like to put a locking marker in it so I don't have to keep track of anything. And I just kind of flip it up out of the way. It just kind of keeps me on track. Sometimes I put markers, you know, at the outside borders if it's a large area, or I'll add markers, you know, like if it's this, I'll add a marker, you know, however many, 5 stitches down or 5 rows down or whatever, just to try to help keep myself on track, because it can be quite easy to get off track. But again, don't go too many at once. After I have marked my centers, I'm going to find out how many rows down I need to go. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So the eighth row down is where the nose is going to happen. And then I go 1, 2, this is 3. Sometimes I count across 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and just kind of keep myself notes so that I know where I should be. Then I'm gonna break a long piece of yarn off. I like to make it the length of my arm span, and I do that because that's as long as I can pull the stitch up with my hand. If I go much longer than that, yes, there's less ends to weave in, but it is such a pain and it's not worth it. So just kind of mess around with different lengths and you'll figure out what works for you. I kind of leave the tail about halfway down again, so I just don't have to draw the yarn up quite as long. So I'm gonna make sure my tail is there. So this is the first row that we've got marked. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is this stitch. And so I'm actually going to start, this is row 8, but I'm actually going to get started right at the base of that stitch, which is technically sitting right in row 9. And then I'll pull my yarn through, leave a tail about like that. Okay. Before I get started, I always make sure I'm doing the center stitch. My first stitch is a center stitch. Should I start over here? Probably, but that's not what I do. I have to make sure the first stitch that I do, that I'm basing everything off of, is the center. So that's this one here. When you are pulling your duplicate stitch, it is very, very easy to over tighten these. What happens if you over tighten them is they look really tortured. And so if you make it so the gauge on these duplicate stitches exactly matches the gauge on the surrounding fabric, it will be too tight. Okay, so just make sure that you're being careful. I'm gonna undo this. Okay, we're gonna practice that again. So we come up from the bottom of the stitch. Basically all you're doing for duplicate stitches, we are copying one stitch at a time. So I am copying right now this stitch right here. So I'm gonna follow the yarn. It goes up, it goes behind this and back out. So pull that. Again, not super tight. So one thing that you'll notice, it kind of starts to loop like that. I like it to sit right on top of the stitch. So sometimes I guide it over if it's doing that. Now I'm gonna follow the second leg of the stitch and then it goes back into the base of the stitch. I'm gonna do that. And I'm just gonna preemptively go through the next stitch that I need to do. Draw this up. Okay, so this is about how we want it. So you can tell based on looking at it, like this is quite a bit looser than the surrounding fabric. It's gonna look a little bit weird right now, but I promise you by the time you are done, it will look perfectly fine once it's blocked and all of that. So just, if you're gonna err on the side of being too tight or too loose, please err on the side of being too loose. Okay, so we've drawn up the second loop, and then the following one I'm gonna go through is here. Pull that through, and then this stitch. Okay. And then down here. And you'll start getting faster the more you do it. Alrighty. Okay, so that's the first detailed section. So if I need a break after that, then I go and eat some chocolate and then I come back or make a cup of tea or whatever does your thing. So it should look about like that. One thing that I mentioned earlier is that if you are doing a larger area, like a whole row across, typically I'm gonna recommend that you do not move through that section vertically, move horizontally. So let's say I wanted to continue on this area. Okay, I'm gonna come back up here. Every time I come up a row, up or down a row, it's going to kind of, the first stitch gets a little leggy. And so if I keep going vertically, let's see if you can see this. What I find is my stitches start to get like this weird loopiness about them. It doesn't quite sit right as I work these because you're kind of working up and down and it kind of looks like sheaths of wheat or something to me. So it doesn't really look like the rest of the fabric. So I don't like that. So when I am doing these, like a larger section, let me take this out. So if I am doing like a larger section, for example, this section, I'm going to go horizontally and complete the entire row and then come here and go horizontally and complete the entire row. So I find that those stitches are going to look a lot better if I go this way. You can see how they will behave more properly of how we want knit stitches to behave. They look more like a knit stitch. So that's what I do over there. Let me take the next part that I'm going to show you guys is how to do just a little bit of embroidery. I do use embroidery a little bit at times. I try to make it so that the embroidery stitches are optional. If you hate embroidering stitches, I don't want to torture you too much, but sometimes it just looks best. So I'll just go over a couple of common embroidery stitches that I use. So I use, in my patterns, you can see like embroidery stitches like this. It might just be a single line. It might be, you know, like a mouth or, you know, whatever. How I find that works best, let me take this out. So if I'm doing like the mouth that's in here, I'm going to kind of experiment, to be honest, because everybody's knitting is a little different. Even my own knitting between sock 1 and sock 2 is sometimes different. So don't feel like you have to be married to the chart. If you want to move your mouth down 2 stitches or whatever, make it wider, make it shorter, whatever, that is perfectly fine. These are just, you know, this is a suggestion. Do whatever you want. So I'm going to come out the first side. Then I'm going to come to its corresponding like opposite. I'm going to come down in the middle. One thing I noticed that when people do these kinds of mouths, embroidery mouths, is that they tend to pull things a bit too tight. And what happens if we pull it too tight is it starts to look like weird, as you can see. So I make sure that I'm going to leave it like on the looser side, not too loose. Like don't get carried away. This is too loose, okay? We want it about like this. So then I go back in. This is just going to tack the little mouth down. So that looks pretty good. To me, it looks a lot like the first one. So I like how it's coming. So if I'm pleased with how that embroidery stitch is setting, I'm going to show you, this is kind of a, I don't know what you would call it, kind of a extra secure square knot. This is not something that you usually use in knitting very much, but this is something that I use in embroidery. So what I do, because I want that mouth to stay that looseness that it is there, and I want less ends to weave in, I'm going to continue to use my duplicate stitch thread or yarn. So what we're going to do is we're going to basically tie a square knot with an extra step. So we're going to go right over left and through, and then bring it down. Do not pull this snug. I know you want to. Don't do it. Now we're going to go left over right. Before I'm going to pull that one down, I'm going to go around one more time and through the middle. So it's basically just a knot, but with one extra step. Okay, pull that, not tight, just to tack it down. Now we're going to go right over left again. Now you can tug the hell out of it. We will still weave in this end. Is the correct thing to do unless you're terribly lazy. I wouldn't know anybody that would just cut it out. Just kidding. I totally do that all the time. So it's not going to kill anybody if you snip the end on this side. Just saying. But don't do as I say, not as I do, I guess. Or do as I do, and we'll both be screwed together. Okay. Okay. So that's a common embroidery stitch that we're going to use. Some other common embroidery stitches that I like, especially for socks. Sometimes I find that doing just a single stitch looks a little bit weird, like it's just like a single V and a field by itself. So I do like a wrap stitch instead on some of the smaller sizes details. So I'm going to bring the yarn through around the stitch that's indicated on the chart. Instead of doing duplicate stitch, I'm just going to go behind the stitch like that. We're just going to wrap it. So that's like once, twice, 2 or 3 times is usually sufficient. And so sometimes like on little eyes or that kind of stuff, I use that. It's like that. Another stitch that I use occasionally when I'm doing these is called a French knot. and it's not super hard, but I'm going to do it a little bit different than what you do when you are crocheting. So if you, or I mean, not crocheting, embroidering. So if you are an embroidery person, you'll know how to do this, but just keep your eye on it really quick. So we're going to wrap the yarn around the needle 3 times. Wherever the French knot is where we come out. Typically in embroidery, we would then go back through the same hole. Because this is knitting, this is just going to pop right out the back. So I'm gonna go through a different, you should have one piece of thread in between where you come out and go back in. So then I'm gonna go like that. It'll come through. Before I pull everything super snug, I'm just gonna make sure everything is laying how I want it to, and then you'll pull. And you can see now it's not gonna go anywhere. So yeah, that's how we're gonna do. Yeah, I think that's just about all of the embroidery stitches that I use on socks. So that should keep... I have just finished working the duplicate stitch on the socks that I'm working on. I wanted to really quick show weaving in the ends on duplicate stitch because it's a little bit annoying and I don't want to leave you guys not knowing what to do. So on the inside of the work, I've got 2 ends. Sometimes people really worry that their stitching is going to come undone if they don't like weave it in like forever like you do normally. This is really not the case in my experience. So I don't really worry too much about weaving it in quite a long ways. I'm going to just go in the back of the pearl bumps. Doesn't really matter which color you pick. Just make sure you're not, you know, going to the outside of the work. And I'm just going to kind of, like stitch a very small amount like that. Before I cut anything, I stretch it this way, stretch it that way, and then I leave maybe like 3/4 of an inch. And I do just like leave it loose like that. It doesn't bother me. It hasn't bothered me. But if you're very sensitive, it might. But and I just leave it like that. I'll do the same thing on this one. I wanted to show what it looks like on a larger area. So this is what the wrong side on my barefoot socks looks like. So you can see how short the amount I actually am weaving in. I feel like people worry like it's not going to be long enough, but especially like on the ball of the foot like this, like every single time like I'm wearing this and I'm walking, it's felting. It's just warmth and it's agitation all day long. So it's very, very, very unlikely that any of these stitches are going to come undone. Even with the best superwash type of yarn, it will naturally felt itself together. So I just kind of like weave it in for a little ways and then I snip it. This one, you can see I've already worn around a little. The tail I left long will naturally kind of just embed itself. Like I don't think any of them are out loose anymore. They'll just kind of naturally take care of themselves, I guess. And so I don't worry too much about it. But yeah, this is kind of what it's going to look like on the wrong side. I had some testers worried about like if they were going to feel it when they're walking. What I would say to that is I'm absolutely certain that there are some people with feet that are sensitive enough that they can feel it. So I don't want to say like, no one on the planet can feel it. Totally, I'm sure there are people that can. I will say this though, however, I don't think the majority of people have feet sensitive enough to be able to feel it. So I think that you're pretty safe to do it. However, if you find that when you darn socks that you do feel and like it bothers you when you're wearing darned socks, you know, then I would say, yes, go ahead and skip duplicate stitch on the balls of the feet for you. But for me, I can wear darned socks all day long and I don't even notice that it's there after, 5 minutes. It's worn itself down and they really marry pretty well together. So if you are somebody like me who has to darn socks quite a lot, this is going to feel... Probably I feel like it's even less profile than darning is, in my opinion. So if you can wear darn sock, I don't want you to be like too worried about it. It is a second layer here, but like the bottom of your foot is surprisingly not that sensitive. You can get away with a lot on that. So yeah, don't worry too much about that unless you are somebody that has like super sensitive feet. I think a lot of people also worry about any little piece of the original color that peeks through when they're doing like a large field of duplicate stitch. There's nobody on the planet who's not going to get these occasional little windows of the layer below. So I don't want you guys to think like, oh, my socks don't look perfect. Like, you are, first of all, it's on the bottom of your foot, so like whatever. But second of all is that like, if these look perfect, then no one would know you make them. So I personally am of the opinion with hand knits that I want people to I want people to know I made them so they can tell me how great I am. So yeah, don't feel like, oh, they look homemade. Great. We are homemaking them. That's wonderful. I'm so glad they look homemade because we homemade them. So I don't know. That's my philosophy on it. So, okay. Yeah. Now I'm going to be ready to soak this and start blocking. So when it comes to blocking on socks, like honestly, you can really just skip it if you hate it. It is socks. You have permission to just leave them alone if you don't want to do it. If you want that like really crisp look, so this is the difference between the one that I've already blocked and the one that's hot off the needles, as we say. And so it's just going to give you like this evenness, and it looks a lot more crisp. That being said, like it's going to look just fine on your foot. So don't worry about it if you aren't into doing that. So what I do is, I'm either, you either are going to hand wash these if that is what you're doing, or you can just chuck them in the machine. Personally, I found that, if I don't make my socks machine washable, I am way too precious about them, and then I will not actually wear them because I'm like, oh, I don't want to have to hand wash them. So I recommend whenever you are knitting socks, pick a superwash wool, and however you want to treat the final socks is how you want to treat your swatch before you measure it. So for the swatch for this one, I knit it up, I chucked it in the wash, and I chucked it in the dryer because something that I do is I do dry mine, but the knitting gods haven't come down to like strike me down yet, so I think it's okay. So I just put them in the dryer for maybe like 15-20 minutes just to kind of give it a head start on drying. I just kind of worry in the winter that stuff will like get moldy, and I've had that happen one time ever because I blocked something in the basement. So now I'm like very paranoid about it. So I just chuck them in the dryer for like 15 minutes. Don't let them run the whole cycle or they might shrink up on you. So okay, I'm gonna go get my sock wet. My sock is now freshly wet. So I'm going to use a sock blocker. If you don't have a sock blocker, really, I just kind of make sure that they're laying out nice and flat as I can get them, like that. Because you're not going to have a blocker for every size. If you're knitting socks for somebody's baby or your, friend's kids or something, you're just going to lay it out flat. If you have a sock blocker, I just stretch it out over it, and then I make sure to kind of pat it a little bit, just to make sure everything's laying down nice and flat. For the ones that I'm doing today, the little ears are pretty prominent. If you're doing something like this that has these scallop built in to the ribbing, when I get it on the blocker, what I'm gonna do is pop this on. Before I walk away from these socks, I just give this like a tug like that, and I'm holding it at the base and just tugging it up a couple times, and then the same on this side, tugging it up a couple times, and then checking that they're up before I walk away. And then I just lay them, leave them to dry, and they will be fine. But I don't need to do that on these ones because the ear is actually a separate piece. I try to avoid that when I can because I don't want to have to weave in more ends, but sometimes it can't be avoided. So we're just going to leave it like this. And then, yeah, just leave them to dry. If you haven't already weaved in your ends, go ahead and weave in your ends. And that's about it. And you should have a nice pair of socks, and they should make you happy every time you look at them in your drawer. All right, that's it for my tutorial. I did promise to give you guys details on what yarns and things that I used. So for the main yarn on these, the dyer is called What Mustard Made, and I really love this stuff, but it comes from England, so you have to plan that you're going to wait a little while while the yarn is coming. So this one is the sock yarn 4-ply, and it's BFL, which is actually really great for sock because all the stitches aren't sliding off if I have to take my needles out, which I really like. And so if you're doing 2-color work, I really want to do some with Fair Isle with this. So the colors I used today was Oil Slick. That's this one. This one is Little Neon Heart. And I love it. It does make little neon hearts all around your work, which is great. The needles that I used today were just the Chargo Red Lace. And I think that's everything I used. The sock blockers I got from Knit Picks. Alrighty, get knitting, have fun. If you're not having fun, then throw your knitting out the window and go get a glass of wine. That's what they say that you should do. That's the traditional way to knit. All right, bye.